Article 1. The development of antiseptic techniques in medical history. The advancement of antiseptic techniques in medical practice represents a pivotal development in the history of human health. Prior to the 19th century, surgical procedures were often fatal, not necessarily because of the complexity of the operations themselves, but due to rampant infections that followed. The lack of understanding about microorganisms and their role in disease led to unsanitary medical practices, which significantly increased mortality rates. The transformation of surgery from a high-risk endeavor to a relatively safe medical intervention is largely attributed to the advent of antiseptic techniques. Before the germ theory of disease was widely accepted, many physicians adhered to miasmatic theory, which posited that diseases were caused by bad air arising from decomposing matter. As a result, efforts to improve sanitation were not specifically directed at eliminating microscopic organisms. Hospitals were often unhygienic, with surgeons using unwashed instruments and wearing blood-stained clothing as a badge of honor. It was not uncommon for surgical tools to be reused without sterilization and for hands to be wiped on aprons between operations. These practices, in hindsight, were breeding grounds for infection. Although initially met with skepticism, Lister's techniques gradually gained acceptance within the medical community. As more surgeons adopted antiseptic procedures and witnessed improved patient outcomes, resistance waned. The concept of sterile technique evolved from these early practices, eventually leading to the development of aseptic methods. Unlike antiseptic procedures that involve killing germs already present, aseptic techniques aim to prevent contamination in the first place, such as sterilizing instruments with heat and using gloves, masks, and gowns during surgery. The implications of antiseptic techniques extended beyond surgery. Childbirth, for example, was another area where infection rates were alarmingly high. Puerperal fever, a deadly postpartum infection, was a major cause of maternal mortality in hospitals. The introduction of antiseptic practices in obstetrics dramatically reduced these fatalities. Similarly, in the field of wound care, the use of antiseptics helped prevent infections in military settings, particularly during conflicts like World War I, when large numbers of soldiers suffered traumatic injuries. The evolution of antiseptic practices also fostered further scientific inquiry into microbiology and immunology. The realization that invisible organisms could cause disease prompted more rigorous laboratory research and the development of vaccines and antibiotics. In this way, antiseptic methods not only saved countless lives directly, but also laid the groundwork for modern medical science. The focus on cleanliness and microbial control became foundational to medical education and hospital design, influencing policies and protocols around the world. Despite its success, antiseptic practice was not without limitations or criticisms. Early antiseptics like carbolic acid were caustic and sometimes caused chemical burns or irritation to patients and surgeons alike. Moreover, some practitioners questioned the practicality and necessity of these procedures. However, over time, improvements in antiseptic solutions and the introduction of more effective and less harmful agents addressed many of these concerns. The shift from antiseptic to aseptic technique further minimized direct exposure to harsh chemicals. Today, the principles established during the antiseptic revolution remain deeply embedded in healthcare systems worldwide. The simple act of hand-washing, once an overlooked routine, is now regarded as one of the most critical practices for preventing the spread of infection. Sterilization protocols, clean operating environments, and strict hygiene standards owe much to the work of pioneers like Lister. While technological advances have introduced new tools and materials, the core idea of maintaining a germ-free environment continues to guide medical procedures. In conclusion, the development of antiseptic techniques marked a turning point in medical history, transforming the outcomes of surgical and medical care. By challenging prevailing misconceptions about disease and emphasizing microbial causation, figures like Joseph Lister revolutionized healthcare practices. These innovations not only reduced mortality, but also catalyzed a broader transformation in how society understands and manages disease, laying the foundation for modern clinical medicine. Article 2. The origins and impact of the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution, spanning the 16th and 17th centuries, marked a profound transformation in humanity's understanding of the natural world. It was during this period that traditional views rooted in classical antiquity and religious doctrine were challenged by emerging empirical methods and observational science. The revolution laid the foundation for modern scientific inquiry, with lasting consequences not only for science and technology, but also for broader philosophical, political, and cultural developments in Europe and beyond. Prior to the scientific revolution, explanations of natural phenomena were largely based on the teachings of ancient authorities such as Aristotle and Ptolemy. These classical models, particularly those concerning the structure of the universe and the nature of matter, were closely aligned with the doctrines of the Catholic Church. The geocentric model, which placed Earth at the center of the universe, was universally accepted and reinforced by religious institutions. Science was regarded more as a process of interpreting authoritative texts than as a means of investigating the natural world through experimentation. One of the pivotal figures in initiating the revolution was Nicolaus Copernicus. In 1543, he published De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium, which proposed a heliocentric model of the universe. This radical theory posited that the Earth and other planets orbited the Sun, contradicting the long-held geocentric view. Though initially met with resistance, Copernicus' ideas set the stage for future astronomers, such as Johannes Kepler and Galileo Galilei, to refine and support heliocentric theory with empirical evidence. Johannes Kepler, working in the early 17th century, advanced Copernican theory by introducing laws of planetary motion based on careful observations and mathematical calculations. He demonstrated that planetary orbits were elliptical rather than circular, which corrected a fundamental flaw in earlier astronomical models. Around the same time, Galileo Galilei utilized a telescope, a relatively new invention, to observe celestial bodies. His observations of Jupiter's moons and the phases of Venus provided strong evidence in favor of the heliocentric model and directly contradicted Ptolemaic cosmology. The scientific revolution was also marked by the development of new scientific methods. Francis Bacon advocated for inductive reasoning, emphasizing observation and experimentation as the basis for knowledge. Meanwhile, René Descartes emphasized deductive reasoning and mathematical analysis. Together, their philosophies contributed to what would become known as the scientific method, a structured approach to inquiry that prioritizes evidence, repeatability, and rational analysis. This methodological shift was critical in legitimizing science as a distinct and credible field of knowledge. Perhaps no figure epitomizes the scientific revolution more than Isaac Newton. His 1687 work, Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, synthesized the findings of his predecessors and formulated the laws of motion and universal gravitation. Newton's theories not only explained the movement of celestial and terrestrial objects, but also united physics and mathematics into a single framework. His work symbolized the culmination of the revolution and solidified the mechanistic worldview that would dominate scientific thinking for centuries. The effects of the scientific revolution extended far beyond scientific disciplines. Philosophically, it fostered a sense of intellectual independence and skepticism toward traditional authority. Enlightenment thinkers drew upon scientific reasoning to critique social and political institutions, advocating for secular governance, individual rights, and progress. Scientifically grounded inquiry began to influence fields such as economics, political theory, and education, reshaping the intellectual landscape of Europe. However, the revolution did not unfold without conflict. Many of its proponents faced resistance from religious authorities who viewed scientific discoveries as threats to established doctrine. Galileo, for instance, was famously tried by the Roman Catholic Inquisition and placed under house arrest for promoting heliocentrism. The tension between faith and reason became a defining feature of the era and continues to shape discussions about the relationship between science and religion to this day. In retrospect, the scientific revolution represents more than just a series of discoveries. It signifies a fundamental change in the way knowledge is acquired and validated. By emphasizing observation, mathematics, and systematic experimentation, early modern scientists laid the groundwork for centuries of technological advancement and intellectual progress. The enduring legacy of this period is evident in the methods and principles that continue to guide contemporary scientific research and inquiry. Article 3. The social structure of hunter-gatherer societies. Hunter-gatherer societies, which prevailed for the majority of human history, offer critical insights into the evolution of social behavior, cooperation, and community organization. These groups, typically composed of small, mobile bands of people who subsisted by hunting animals and gathering wild plants, lived without the hierarchical institutions seen in later agricultural and industrial societies. By studying such societies, both historically and through surviving examples, anthropologists and sociologists can better understand the adaptive strategies that shaped early human culture. One of the most defining characteristics of hunter-gatherer societies is their egalitarian social structure. Unlike in agrarian societies, where wealth and status are often concentrated among a few individuals or families, hunter-gatherer communities tend to distribute resources relatively equally among members. Decision-making is typically communal, with group consensus guiding major choices. Leadership, if present, is fluid and based on qualities like experience, generosity, and skill, rather than inherited status or wealth. This structure helps minimize social tensions and supports cooperation, which is vital for survival in unpredictable environments. Mobility is another essential aspect of hunter-gatherer life. These societies move frequently in response to environmental conditions and resource availability. Seasonal migration patterns ensure that food sources are not overexploited, and the light footprint left on the landscape aids ecological sustainability. Mobility also influences social relations by limiting the accumulation of material goods and reinforcing the importance of shared labor and mutual aid. Since individuals cannot hoard resources in such fluid settings, social cohesion is strengthened by reciprocity rather than competition. The economic systems of hunter-gatherer societies are often described as immediate return systems, meaning that food is consumed shortly after it is obtained. This contrasts with delayed return systems found in agricultural or industrial economies, where resources can be stored or traded over long periods. Immediate return systems discourage hoarding and emphasize daily cooperation. Sharing is not only a moral expectation but a practical necessity. This mode of living fosters strong social bonds and reduces inequality, as survival depends on communal support rather than personal accumulation. Gender roles in hunter-gatherer societies, while distinct, are generally more flexible and balanced than those in many later societies. Typically, men engage in hunting while women gather plant-based foods and care for children. However, these roles are not rigid, and in many groups, women also participate in hunting or serve as key decision makers. The contributions of both sexes are essential to the group's survival, and status is often more closely tied to knowledge and skill than to gender. Such dynamics challenge assumptions about universal gender hierarchies and highlight the diversity of social roles across human cultures. Kinship and social ties play a central role in the organization of hunter-gatherer societies. Extended family networks form the foundation of most bands, with kinship defining obligations and alliances. However, relationships are often fluid and adaptable, allowing for the inclusion of non-relatives through mechanisms like adoption or ritual friendship. These social strategies help maintain group size and cohesion, especially in environments where population densities are low. Flexible kinship systems enable bands to adapt to changing circumstances without the need for formal institutions. Religion and spirituality in hunter-gatherer societies are deeply connected to nature and daily life. Belief systems tend to be animistic, attributing spiritual significance to animals, plants, and natural phenomena. Rituals, storytelling, and symbolic art often serve to reinforce group identity and cultural continuity. Religious leaders, such as shamans or healers, usually gain influence through personal charisma and perceived connection to the spiritual world rather than through institutional power. These practices support emotional well-being, social cohesion, and a sense of connection to the environment. Modern studies of hunter-gatherers have occasionally been romanticized, portraying these groups as noble savages living in harmony with nature. While such depictions may highlight valuable aspects of non-industrial societies, they risk oversimplifying the challenges these groups face, including conflict, scarcity, and environmental pressures. Additionally, many contemporary hunter-gatherer communities must navigate complex relationships with surrounding agricultural or industrial societies, leading to cultural assimilation, displacement, or marginalization. It is important to approach these societies with both respect and critical understanding, recognizing their diversity and resilience. Despite the dramatic changes brought by agriculture, urbanization, and technological advancement, the legacy of hunter-gatherer societies remains embedded in human culture. Practices such as food sharing, egalitarian values, and cooperative child-rearing continue to inform modern social behavior. By examining the foundational structures of early human communities, scholars can uncover insights into the roots of contemporary social norms and the evolutionary underpinnings of cooperation and sociality. These lessons remind us that modern society has much to learn from its distant past. Article 4. The Architecture of Ancient Mesopotamia. Ancient Mesopotamia, located between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in what is now modern-day Iraq, is often referred to as the cradle of civilization. Among its many cultural and technological innovations, the architectural achievements of Mesopotamian societies stand as a testament to their ingenuity and organizational capabilities. These early city-states developed complex urban plans, monumental religious structures, and durable construction techniques that influenced subsequent civilizations in the region and beyond. One of the most iconic features of Mesopotamian architecture is the ziggurat, a massive terrace structure that served religious purposes. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt, which were primarily tombs, ziggurats were temple platforms believed to connect the heavens and the earth. Each city-state typically had its own ziggurat, dedicated to its patron deity. Built using sun-dried mud bricks, these structures were layered in successively smaller platforms, with staircases or ramps leading to a shrine at the top. The most famous example is the ziggurat of Ur, which dates back to the early 21st century BCE. Materials and environmental conditions played a significant role in shaping Mesopotamian construction. Due to the scarcity of stone and timber in the alluvial plain, builders relied heavily on mud bricks, which were inexpensive and widely available. However, this material was not as durable as stone, which is why few Mesopotamian structures survive intact today. To counteract the erosion caused by rain and flooding, walls were frequently thickened, and buildings were often rebuilt or restored on the same sites over centuries, resulting in layered archaeological mounds known as tells. The layout of Mesopotamian cities reflected both practical and ceremonial considerations. Cities were typically walled for protection and featured narrow, winding streets that evolved organically over time rather than from planned grids. At the city's center was often a complex that included the main ziggurat, temples, administrative buildings, and the ruler's palace. Residential areas were clustered around this core, and dwellings varied in size and complexity based on the status of the inhabitants. These urban centers demonstrated an early form of centralized governance and social stratification. Mesopotamian palaces were not merely residences, but symbols of royal authority and administrative control. Constructed on raised platforms, they often included multiple courtyards, reception halls, and storerooms. Relief carvings depicting military victories, religious rituals, and divine protection adorned palace walls, reinforcing the king's power and divine favor. In Assyrian cities such as Nineveh and Nimrud, these artworks reached a high degree of sophistication and have become crucial sources for understanding Mesopotamian political and religious ideology. Religious architecture in Mesopotamia extended beyond ziggurats. Temples were central to civic life and functioned as both religious and economic institutions. Temples managed land, employed workers, and collected offerings, essentially operating like large bureaucratic centers. The temple precincts were often surrounded by workshops and storehouses, underscoring the close connection between the divine and the economic in Mesopotamian culture. Priests and priestesses held significant influence, acting as intermediaries between the people and the gods. Artistic expression and writing were frequently integrated into architectural spaces. Clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform script recorded building inscriptions, dedicatory texts, and administrative records, often stored in palace and temple archives. Decorative features such as mosaic columns, glazed bricks, and elaborately carved doorways highlighted the aesthetic dimension of Mesopotamian architecture. These artistic elements served not only to beautify structures, but also to communicate political and spiritual messages. Over the millennia, Mesopotamian architecture evolved in response to shifting political powers, technological advancements, and changing religious practices. The Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians each left their mark, modifying architectural forms to suit their needs and ideologies. For instance, the Babylonians are credited with enhancing urban planning and incorporating more elaborate fortifications, while the Assyrians emphasized grandeur and intimidation in their palace complexes. Despite the eventual decline of Mesopotamian civilizations, their architectural legacy persisted. Later cultures in the Near East drew upon Mesopotamian models, especially in religious and civic construction. Even today, archaeologists and historians continue to uncover and study these ancient sites, revealing insights into the social, political, and religious dynamics of one of the world's earliest urban societies.